Marcellus Williams is scheduled to be executed on September 24th of this year for a crime that DNA proves he did not commit. The St. Louis County prosecuting attorney reviewed these DNA results and filed a motion to vacate Mr. Williams' conviction because he believed the DNA results proved by clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Williams did not commit this crime. Although the circuit court has not yet held a hearing to address this motion and no court has ever considered the new exculpatory evidence, the Missouri Supreme Court has set an execution date for Mr. Williams. This comes from the Innocence Project website, an introduction to the petition that they have set up to bring awareness to this terrifying situation. The petition is in collaboration with the Midwest Innocence Project and Missourians to abolish the death penalty. While it is encouraging to see so many organizations, professionals, and concerned strangers taking an interest in this nightmare situation, the more people that we can get talking about this case, the better. Regardless of your opinion about our justice system, this case is a serious lapse in that system, and Marcellus Williams is in real danger right now. Okay, so welcome to a special edition of the Crime Bistro podcast. I guess you could call it a bonus episode, but honestly, as someone who is really invested in the world of true crime, I just could not wait to record and get this episode released because of its imminence and because of the political nature of this case. We will talk about how the Attorney General's office is severely failing in their responsibility to find justice here, and they are blatantly ignoring the true facts in this case. As always, this show gazes into the thrillingly twisted world of true crime, examining real cases while we share in a passion for crime and coffee alike. I'll be honest, my beverage of choice for this one is currently water, because I'm already so heated over this situation that caffeine will not do me any bit of good, but grab whatever you have on hand and let's explore this disturbing case together. So, who is Marcellus Williams and how did we get here? Let's talk about his case and then go through all of the recent updates, how we can provide support, and I also want to talk about the Innocence Project as a whole and the work that they are doing. And one more note before I jump into this case, I'm going to use the phrase exculpatory evidence a couple of times, so for anyone who doesn't know, exculpatory evidence is evidence favorable to the defendant in a criminal trial that exonerates or tends to exonerate the defendant of guilt. It's the opposite of inculpatory evidence, which tends to present guilt. Okay. So let's talk about Marcellus Williams and how we got here. On August 11th of 1998, a woman named Felicia Gale, a former reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was found stabbed to death in her home. The perpetrator left behind considerable forensic evidence, including fingerprints, footprints, and trace DNA on the murder weapon, a knife from Mrs. Gale's kitchen that was actually found still in her neck when she was discovered. None of this forensic evidence matches Mr. Williams. You will hear me say that a lot. None of the evidence matches Mr. Williams. The prosecution's case was heavily reliant on the testimony of two eyewitnesses, both of whom were reported to be unreliable and to have been incentivized. The investigation into Felicia Gale's death had been cold until an inmate named Henry Cole, a man with a lengthy criminal record, claimed that Williams confessed the crime to him while they were in jail together. Henry Cole told police to speak to a woman named Laura Asaro, who was an ex-girlfriend of Williams and who had an extensive criminal record of her own. Being that Henry and Laura had such extensive records, it nearly goes without saying that they were known to be liars, and there were a couple of other things to note about their testimony that's really important. Neither person was able to give any information about the case that hadn't been included in news reports or media accounts, which tends to be a clear tell in these cases. They made some statements that were inconsistent to one another's, so essentially Henry and Laura were not able to provide any information that could be independently verified as relevant to this case. Aside from their testimony, the only piece of information that Henry and Laura were able to provide was directing the police to another witness. This was a man who told police that Mr. Williams sold him a laptop that was taken from Felicia Gale's home. What the jury didn't get to hear in the courtroom was that Mr. Williams also told this witness that he had actually received the laptop from Laura Asaro. Now, I don't want to move on in this case without saying this. Everything that is happening in this case right now is entirely separate from whatever may be in Mr. Williams' past. Even if he was in possession of the laptop, even if he had prior convictions, what it comes down to is that in this case, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that there is no physical evidence to connect Mr. Williams to this murder, and with a lack of other evidence that could reach the standard of reasonable doubt, Mr. Williams is still facing execution. But we all have a chance to stand up for him, and this is now literally a matter of life and death. Anyways, we're going to move on, but I just wanted to make sure that I said that early on in the episode. Marcellus Williams was convicted and he received the death penalty in 2001. He has repeatedly filed motions to try and prove his innocence in this case, and he has faced multiple execution dates over the years. To date, no court has given substantive consideration to the evidence that exonerates him from committing this crime. In 2015, the Missouri Supreme Court stayed his execution and appointed an expert to review DNA testing of potentially exculpatory evidence. The next update in this case would come in 2017 when a new execution date was set by the Missouri Supreme Court. This execution date was set in 2017 even though by then the results of the DNA testing had been returned and Mr. Williams was proved not to be the source of the male DNA that was found on the murder weapon. So obviously that's a problem, which I'm glad somebody started taking things on the right path at this point, although it doesn't last very long. The Missouri governor at the time, who was named Eric Greitens, stayed the execution and convened a board of inquiry to investigate the case. Now this is shocking, but this board was put together on August 22nd of 2017. So what do you think Mr. Williams' execution date was? August 22nd, 2017. And this wasn't even just in the nick of time. This is horrifying. Mr. Williams had already eaten his last meal. I have steam coming out of my ears right now, so I hope that I don't sound too wacky. But anyways, in accordance with Missouri law, this new stay on execution would be required to be upheld as long as the Board of Inquiry concluded its review and provided a formal report. This inquiry board was in session until June of 2023, which among all of the horrible stuff in this case, that's honestly really funny to me. What in the world were they doing for 6 whole years? Is it a biannual meeting or something? That's ridiculous. So if anyone out there knows, I would love to know more about how these boards operate, because 6 years? Really? But anyways, the governor of Missouri, Mike Parson, in June of 2023 dissolved this board unexpectedly, which is an issue because, as mentioned, they had not yet submitted their final report to finalize their recommendations. Now that the board was no longer in existence, the Missouri Attorney General named Andrew Bailey started to look towards setting a new execution date. Mr. Williams rightfully sued Governor Parson because the inquiry board was dissolved at his orders. So at a high level here, basically, since Parson dissolved the board without their final report, he was in violation of the law and also of Mr. Williams' right as a defendant. And now, I know that I said I had steam coming out of my ears, but at this point, I promise the whole train is about to pop out of my head at the next part of this story. Governor Parson tried to get the lawsuit against him dismissed, but the request for dismissal was denied by a Cole County civil judge. Governor Parson then decided to take his request to the Missouri Supreme Court, and on June 4th of 2024, the lawsuit was dismissed by the court and Mr. Williams was given a new execution date, September 24th of 2024. Okay, so let's get back to talking about this DNA evidence, and I know that I mentioned there was a lot of DNA at the scene, so we are going to touch on that as well. After the exculpatory evidence was brought to his attention, the St. Louis County prosecuting attorney named Wesley Bell appointed a prosecutor to review this case. The prosecutor, in reviewing Mr. Williams' case, looked through 3 independent DNA reports. In all 3 of these reports, it was concluded that Mr. Williams was not the source of the DNA on the murder weapon, and that DNA testing also excluded him from being the source of the other evidence left at the scene. This includes a bloody fingerprint, bloody footprint, and hairs that were found near the victim's body. With this information, Wesley Bell filed a motion to vacate Mr. Williams' conviction on the basis that he could not have committed this crime. The motion states, quote, DNA evidence supporting a conclusion that Mr. Williams was not the individual who stabbed Miss Gale has never been considered by any court. This never-before considered evidence, when paired with the relative paucity of other credible evidence supporting guilt, casts inexorable doubt on Mr. Williams' conviction and sentence. End quote. He then went on to urge the court, quote, to begin the process of correcting this manifest injustice by holding a hearing on the newfound evidence and the integrity of Mr. Williams' conviction, end quote. Now, I'm obviously not a lawyer, so I'm not 100% clear on the logistics here, and I will admit that, but I'll tell you what I do know. Wesley Bell's motion has been filed, and it remains pending, which requires that a hearing be held, but Mr. Williams' execution date has remained in place. This hearing is currently scheduled to take place on August 21st of this year, but we're not yet sure if the hearing will actually happen. This is because the Missouri Attorney General's office has filed a motion to block the new evidence hearing. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Missouri Attorney General's office has filed a motion to block the new evidence hearing. This is ridiculous. In the motion that the Attorney General's office filed to block this new hearing, their argument was that a lower court cannot usurp what a higher court has already determined. After the Attorney General's office filed their latest petition to block the evidence hearing, a lawyer representing Marcellus Williams named Tricia Rojo Bushnell said, quote, instead of trying to prevent the circuit court from considering the DNA evidence that exonerates Mr. Williams, the Attorney General should join us in this truth-seeking process in Mr. Williams' case, end quote. And I think that this is perfectly said. Any attorney who truly values their profession should find that they have an obligation not to close cases, but to actually solve them. Now, I want to make sure that I'm providing some context to this case as well, since an article was just posted yesterday on July 25th by News 8, which describes a disturbing pattern in regards to murder convictions that is taking place right now in Missouri. As a preface here, I am not saying that the entire state of Missouri is like this, and I am certainly not saying that every person involved in the legal system in Missouri is corrupt. Obviously, there are lawyers who are fighting hard for Marcellus Williams' freedom and the freedom of others, which is amazing. However, I do think it's important to understand that people are fallible and there are bad seeds everywhere, and it's even more important to call out those bad seeds. So, in essence, that's what I'm doing here. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about the case of Christopher Dunn, another man whose efforts are being thwarted by the Missouri Attorney General, Andrew Bailey. Just a reminder, the Attorney General's office is currently trying to block Marcellus Williams' new evidence hearing. So let's first talk about Christopher Dunn's case and what is happening right now. Christopher was only 18 years old in 1990 when he was accused of murdering a 15-year-old named Rico Rogers who died of gunshot wounds. Similar to Mr. Williams' case, Christopher Dunn was convicted based on the testimony of 2 witnesses. However, the problem with this case is that both of these witnesses later recanted their testimonies, saying that they had been coerced by the police and the prosecutors. So, not good. On Monday, July 22nd of 2024, just this past Monday, a judge named Jason Seinheiser overturned Dunn's murder conviction and ordered for his immediate release. As an 18-year-old at the time that this entire ordeal started for Christopher Dunn, he is now 52 years old, meaning that he has spent over 3 decades of his life sitting in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Andrew Bailey's Office of the Attorney General appealed his release, which left prison officials with nothing to do but refuse to actually release him. This is why I say that not everyone in these cases is a villain, because Judge Seinheiser jumped into action immediately, and he held an emergency hearing on Wednesday, July 24th, which ended with the judge threatening to hold the prison warden in contempt of court if Christopher Dunn was not freed. With these new orders from the judge, Dunn started to sign his release paperwork when his hopes would be dashed once again. The Missouri Supreme Court agreed that they would consider Andrew Bailey's appeal, which meant that, once again, Christopher Dunn would remain in prison. The Midwest Innocence Project, who are also really heavily involved with Marcellus Williams, released a very simple statement on the events that transpired this week for Christopher Dunn, quote, "That is not justice," end quote. Well said, don't need to add anything to that one. Unfortunately, a spokesperson for Andrew Bailey has declined email and text requests for comment on this situation. So obviously, that's pretty bad, but don't go anywhere because I'm unfortunately not done. There is another case that we need to discuss here, and that is the case of Sandra Heem, or Hem, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to say Heem. a now 64-year-old woman who spent 43 years in prison after she was convicted for the stabbing of a library employee in 1980. After her conviction was overturned, Sandra spent an additional month in prison as appeals coming from Andrew Bailey's office went all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court once again. Only this last Friday, on July 19th, there was a final court hearing for Sandra I'm so sorry, I have no idea, where a judge named Ryan Horsman scolded an attorney in Bailey's office for telling the warden not to release Hem on her own recognizance pending the court review. His exact words were, quote, "To call someone and tell them to disregard a court order is wrong," end quote, and he followed this by threatening that if Hem wasn't released within hours, Andrew Bailey himself would be in danger of being held in contempt of court. Thankfully, she was released later that day, on the 19th, and reunited with her family. However, the whole ordeal was taken way too far, and her lawyer, Sean O'Brien, said, and I think this is probably one of the better ways to describe how this whole situation unfolded, talking about the legal teams that were trying to prevent her release. He said, quote, "They fight every case tooth and nail," end quote. Sandra Hem is the longest known wrongfully imprisoned woman in U.S. history. So under Missouri state law, prosecutors are allowed to request hearings when they see evidence of a wrongful conviction, which is the reason why all of these wrongful conviction trials are now being pushed through Missouri courts. However, there is a very clear pattern of these efforts by prosecutors being thwarted by the office of Andrew Bailey. I'm going to provide one more example just to demonstrate that this is an actual pattern. In 2023, Andrew Bailey opposed the release of a man named Lamar Johnson, who spent 28 years in prison after being convicted of murder. A judge in St. Louis overturned the conviction and he was freed, but not without objection from Andrew Bailey. This does seem to be a disturbing trend, and a former attorney general named Jay Nixon, in a case from 2003, made an argument that is literally one of the worst things I've ever heard. I'm sorry in advance because I'm never going to be able to get this out of my head, and now you won't either. In a case where a man named Joe Amrine was fighting for his innocence, Jay Nixon argued that he should be executed in the name of finality. A state Supreme Court justice named Laura Denver Stith replied, quote, "Are you suggesting even if we find that Mr. Armin is actually innocent, he should be executed?" End quote. And Nixon responded, quote, "That's correct, Your Honor." End quote. Oh my God. Oh my God. I have nothing else to say about that, but oh my God. Armin was exonerated and released, but as recent events have shown, this was probably a moment that helped to set a really concerning precedent among the attorney generals in the state of Missouri. Okay, so let's get back to Andrew Bailey and talk about how he got himself into this position in the first place. When Eric Schmidt, the former attorney general, was elected to the U.S. Senate in November of 2022, Governor Mike Parson appointed Andrew Bailey as the new attorney general. Bailey had formerly been the attorney to the governor, so that's how they knew each other. Political scientists who have reviewed the track record of Andrew Bailey has theorized that his efforts are a way to appear tough on crime and gain votes for an upcoming election, as his first election test is coming later next month in the primaries. One of these political scientists, in particular a man named Ken Warren, a professor at St. Louis University, said that fighting the release of people in custody advances Bailey's agenda, essentially showing that he is, quote, tough on crime, and I'm using air quotes there. So essentially what the theory is that Andrew Bailey is being so tough on these people who are potentially about to be freed from prison because he doesn't want to show that he's letting these people out on the streets again. I'm assuming, but they didn't commit the crimes, so I don't even know what else to say about that. I'm just honestly, I'm at a loss here. However, while Bailey is causing outrage among the public for the recent news about the cases that we've discussed, he's also causing some issues among the legal community as well, for his love of lawsuits, of course. He has sued Planned Parenthood and President Joe Biden, trying to force clinics that provide gender-affirming care to hand over their records. Let's just keep in mind here, these are private medical records, no matter what your opinion is. He also sued the state of New York over its prosecution of Donald Trump, arguing that his recent conviction was an example of election interference. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to take the words of a former federal prosecutor named Richard Serafini. Quote, "One of the silliest things that I think I've ever heard in the practice of law," end quote. I'm just going to let that speak for itself. In reference to his attempts to keep people in prison after overturned convictions, Lindsay Runnels, who is an attorney for the Midwest Innocence Project, said the following, quote, "The system doesn't work if our highest law enforcement officer in the state flouts the court system and believes that they are not accountable to them for their orders and following orders," end quote. Now, I think that this is very well said. This isn't just an Andrew Bailey problem, but he does have power over the actions that he has taken against the people who we've discussed today, and we should be holding him accountable for refuting the direct orders of courts within his own jurisdiction. This whole thing is just horribly backwards. Now, I do want to talk about the Innocence Project for those who don't know about the work that they do. It's incredibly important, and they've had an amazing success rate. But first, I do want to end this off by telling you a little bit more about Marcellus Williams. This quote comes from the Innocence Project, quote, "During his 23 years in prison, Mr. Williams has devoted much of his time to studying Islam and writing poetry. He serves as the Imam for Muslim pioneers at Potosi Correctional Center and is known as Khalifa, I believe, which means leader in Arabic. He has an exemplary prison record and is widely respected within the prison community and beyond," end quote. And my final note on Marcellus Williams is going to be to reiterate this point. No matter what his previous convictions are, no matter what his past looks like, no matter what your opinion is of Marcellus Williams as a person, it does not matter. In this case, he has been proven to be innocent by DNA testing. Eyewitness testimony, as most of us know, can be extremely unreliable, and to rely on it to secure a conviction and then to secure a capital punishment is a little bit insane to me when this other evidence exists. So what I really want to focus on here is down to brass tacks. It does not matter what your opinion is about Marcellus Williams as a person. If he did not commit this crime, he needs to be protected from being punished for committing this crime. It's crazy. But that being said, let's go ahead and wrap up with something that's just a little bit more lighthearted. I want to talk about the Innocence Project and their work, since this episode has really been a bummer so far, and it'd be nice to talk about people who are doing something positive. This is an organization with the goal of preventing wrongful convictions and freeing those who have experienced a wrongful conviction. A lot of this work has to do with the newest advancements in forensic science, including DNA and genealogy testing. And my favorite thing about this organization is that their work does not stop there. They have created an exoneree fund, which allows them to help those who have been freed due to wrongful conviction reintegrate into their lives after prison. They provide reentry support and assist with housing, healthcare, and employment opportunities. And they have had a great amount of success advocating for the passing of over 250 state and federal laws, and due in part to their efforts, all 50 states now allow experts to testify about eyewitness identification and how unreliable it can sometimes be. My other favorite thing about this organization is that because of it, I'm able to end this episode on a more positive note. They do provide all of the resources to help people get involved, in particular right now with Marcellus Williams. You can access petitions, funds, case updates, and more, so if this struck you in any particular way and you want to learn more, just go and visit their website and all of the information is right there. Even if it's just to spread the word about this case, you never know if the person who's going to be the difference is out there, but they just don't know about it yet. And I know that's really cheesy, but I honestly do think that's true, so I think this is probably going to be a good place to just wrap everything up here. Now, of course, I know this one was a little bit different, but I hope that this can do even the smallest bit of good to support Marcellus Williams and his case. I actually just found out about this case on Wednesday, and I knew that I had to say something about it, because this is a case where the influence of the public can legitimately make a difference. As the case develops, I will be following some updates on my social media, so if you're interested to follow along, it's Crime Bistro Podcast on Instagram and Crime Bistro Pod on TikTok. Because this was a random edition, there will still be a new episode posted on Monday, as always, so hopefully you don't need a full week-long break before hearing my voice again, because we're continuing with regular content on Monday. If you stayed to the end of this case, thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you tune in to the other episodes as well. But that's all for me today, so thank you again, and as always, until next time.